I am so excited to interview as my guest today for the All Things Human podcast. I have an amazing guest. I only have amazing, fascinating people on my podcast. I am so delighted to be interviewing Dave Komar. Let me tell you about Dave and why you should listen. He is a retired Brigadier General with the U.S. Army, and he has 31 years of active duty. He served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now he runs a company that helps companies with their culture. It's HR Tech. This is a tool that helps large and medium-sized companies develop and measure and monitor their culture. This thing that's almost impossible to describe, but everyone can feel it. It's kind of like the air we breathe. And sometimes there's this idea out there that it just sort of happens. We all kind of feel it. We hope for a good one, but we don't know how that happens. And if you're lucky, you're in a company that has a good culture. And if you're in a company with a bad culture, well, too bad for you. The reason why I invited Dave on this podcast is this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart with the clients that I work with. So welcome to the podcast. Yay! All right, I'm going to read a little bit more on his bio. 3 master's degrees. He was a fellow at MIT. And Dave was a general officer assignment in charge of the business's Army Initiative Program to efficiently utilize $135 billion of an operating budget. Kind of huge. And he was also responsible for managing the Army's $25 billion annual equipment modernization portfolio. That's everything from boots on the ground, tanks, helicopters, you name it. Fascinating. And Davis is currently president of EDA, Inc. It's an HR tech company that enables leaders to measure and improve this thing that we're talking about, culture. And he is the author of this fabulous book. I read it, and it's called Conquer Your Culture, CEO's Simple and Proven Guide to an Exceptional and Inspiring Company Environment. So, oh my God, there's so much we could talk about, Dave. Wouldn't you agree?
No, absolutely.
I would just love to say, I read a lot of books on leadership, the human condition, because of what I do. And I really liked your book. What I liked about it was that it's very down to earth and practical. And you had 30 some years of experience that you distilled into this book. You've broken it into, I believe, 5 chapters.
Yeah, 5 elements.
5 elements. Tell me why you wrote this book. I mean, you have not only been in the Army, but you're also in civilian, like corporate. So it's such a delight when I can find people who have excelled in the Army and left and then have been in the civilian sector and pulling from your experience. First of all, before I ask, what makes a military's leadership development experience so valuable and unique and useful for the civilian sector?
Yeah, first of all, one of the reasons is, or probably the primary reason, is the fact that the military's leader development program, it's very deliberate, very purposeful. So whether it's your first day in the Army or you're a 3 or 4-star general, there for every level, every progression throughout your career, whether it's for leadership, from a leadership perspective, whether it's from a technical perspective, that there are waypoints along the road that we have, formal schooling, formal in-resident schooling that, number one, provides you the opportunity to learn the material, but secondary and probably more important is it allows you to learn from your peers. So particularly as you get more and more senior, the material, the subject matter, that's great, but it's the discussion, it's sharing other experiences, it's learning what other people did in certain circumstances and whether it worked out well or didn't work out well. That's really critical. So I think that's really what makes it different, is that it's very purposeful and it's continuous throughout your career, literally from the first day in the Army until you're ready to leave the Army.
I think that's so insightful because people don't usually think of the Army as more expansive thinking. I mean, they have this idea of boot camp, course, and somehow the magic happens between when someone is at boot camp, that there's a growth that at a general level, you're thinking with a very different tool set. So the process of how do you grow someone from here to there, it sounds like the Army has developed a curriculum that works, obviously, it's been tested and proven. And I imagine one of the reasons why is because the mission is so important in terms of keeping people alive. I was trying to wrap my brain around why the military does this in such a systematic, effective way versus civilian, where people are coming and going, and it's a little bit different. Can you speak to what you see is different about the way the military builds leadership skills from boot camp to senior leadership, and compare that with what you see in the civilian sector?
Yeah, so for instance, I think the biggest difference is that there's so much research, study, applying lessons learned, constantly improving, that isn't really available to a civilian corporation, because I'll give you an example. So if I was promoted to lieutenant colonel and selected to command a battalion, that's about 500 to 800 people, roughly, depending upon the type of organization. We have literally centuries, if not decades, of experience where we know what skills, what attributes that individual needs to develop in order to be successful. Now that doesn't take the individual out of the equation, but what it does is it identifies, hey, these are the things you're going to have to be able to face, and you're going to have to be able to accomplish. Now, precisely how you do it may vary, but at least you know what you're up against.
Yes.
I think you'd be hard pressed to find in a corporation a list and a corresponding curriculum that says, hey, if you're going to lead a division in this corporation, these are the skills you have to have. And then to educate and train and mentor people to develop those skills.
I agree. I mean, with the clients that I see, it's just sort of a given. It's like every man for himself. There's not always the mentorship. I'm just noticing how the military has such a deep well of developing human behavior, understanding how to bring out the best in people. I mean, it's not just on the battlefield, but it's a whole operation that's very studied. And I just think that's one reason why a lot of very good leaders in corporate come from a military background. So if I understand, you're now CEO of, and you specialize in large organizations with hundreds of employees, large and medium-sized organizations. And from your book, I could tell you were always very interested in how to get the best out of people. And what I liked about the book is that it's very practical. It's not very long. It's not like you have to read, War and Peace. It's very thoughtful questions. Did you find the transition from being a brigadier general to helping CEOs, what were some adjustments you had to make? Because it's a different fish pond, right? Like military's over here, civilian life is over there. What were the biggest adjustments you had to make to adapt what you knew to this new world, or new to you?
That's a great question, Adele. And what I'll start with is, what are the similarities? What didn't I have to adjust? And this really goes back to the professional development that we talked about, even outside of our formal training and education system. And I'll speak specifically to the Army, although the other services have things very similar. But the Army is a culture of coaching. And anytime an individual finds that somebody who either works for them or works alongside them, or maybe even someone they work for, doesn't have a particular skill set, they're going to coach them on that. They're going to help them develop that. So becoming an executive coach to me was very natural. So from that perspective of 31 years of coaching people and being coached and knowing sort of how I like to learn and how other people like to teach, that really didn't cause me to make many adjustments. But what did what was different was the fact that if you look at from a technical perspective, that the CEOs and the executives that I coached, they didn't have the same work experience that I had. They were in different industries. They might be in a very technical industry, like software development or those types of things. Whereas the Army, even though it's becoming more technical all the time, it's still, like I think every organization, is about the people.
Mhm.
So I think that was a little bit different, and being willing to and eager really to learn more about the context within their workplace. But I tell you, I think leadership's leadership, and I think that deep down, everyone wants the same things. They want to be treated with respect. They want to believe that they're working towards a cause that's bigger than themselves. They want to be appreciated for that work. They want to be able to contribute what they can to that work, and they want to feel like they're safe. They're safe to, to disagree, to engage in discussion, to be part of the decision-making process. It goes back to the old Toyota theory, where it's like literally anybody on the line could stop the line. If they saw something that wasn't right, didn't matter who you were, you could stop the line.
Was there an adjustment to your thoughts? Because let's say the civilian world, companies tend to run on a profit motive, is to make money. Whereas the military, that's not the end objective. It's not really to produce more per hour or to keep the stock price high. So the incentives underneath, like what people are incented to do, might be a little bit different. Did you notice if that changed people's behavior at all between running a division in the Army versus running a division of employees?
Well, I think every organization has the same mission, the same goal, is to maximize their output with respect to the inputs.
Okay.
So whether you're producing cars or you're training soldiers and organizations in the military to conduct operations, you have certain resources available to you. So how do you most effectively and efficiently apply those resources? Yes, the profit piece doesn't play in, but what I would tell you is that every leader in the Army gets evaluated on the output. How well does their organization perform with respect to the resources that they've been given? And in organizations that didn't have as many resources as some other similar organizations, and people understood that. It's, what did you do with what you have?
Beautiful, beautiful. And I love how your book kept emphasizing the whole point of culture, whether you're in civilian or in Army. Can we make this a place where people love to work? I mean, that's like, oh my God, like people don't even consider that anymore. It's work is work, and the idea that you could actually enjoy where you work is a refreshing thing. And one thing that I took away from your book is that it does focus more on process, meaning it has to be measurable. It has to have inputs. It has to have outputs. It has to have, how are you going to do this? And I was reminded of some of my graduate work was in quality science, in studying how do you improve a product? Well, how do you improve a culture? It's very similar. You must have some way to measure it. It doesn't just sort of happen. And I just thought it was great that you applied some of these process measures to something that everyone thinks is unmeasurable.
No, that's an interesting perspective. Again, from your background, one of the things that I found that was most prevalent when I talk to CEOs is, when I interview a CEO or talk to a CEO, the first question I always ask them is, culture important? Well, I've never had anyone say no, and I think most people believe it.
Sure.
Then the next question I ask them is, so what kind of culture are you trying to build in this organization? What do you want it to look like? Well, I tell you what, that funnel narrows very rapidly. The percentage of CEOs and their leadership teams who have taken the time and effort and resources to sit down and very deliberately identify and describe the kind of culture that they're trying to build in the company is it's shockingly low. It's like anything in business or anything you're trying to achieve, even in your personal life. What is that? What is that goal?
And
What are you trying to achieve?
yes, and what I liked about your book is not only do you describe the dollars and cents benefits, I mean, low engagement or disengaged employees, I mean, it's outrageous in terms of absenteeism, accident rates, and all that. I mean, if you were just going to be dollars and cents oriented, that's more than enough. But I can tell you from my experience, working with clients, when they are happy at work, oh my gosh, I mean, the impact on their families, on their health, on their, decision making with their HOA, like, I think culture is sort of fluffy sometimes, like, but it has a very practical role in making this world a better place for humans. Like, even if it wasn't a dollars and cents thing, like even if we said it never improved the bottom line at all, I still think when you look at the ROI on just general happiness, stress, I'm convinced domestic violence cases would drop dramatically, alcoholism, all these things that people do to try to just cope another day because they're working in a toxic environment. I mean, that's a lot. I don't know if anyone's ever calculated that, but what do you think of that? That you're actually making this world a better place for humans?
Well, that's really my goal. I want to help create a world where everyone loves where they work, not just for that fact in itself, but what you just described. Just imagine if everyone left work every day and they were energized instead of drained. They felt like they were appreciated for what they did. They felt like they were contributing to something greater themselves. When they left work every day, just imagine what better members of their communities and their families they'd be. And that goes back to really one of the main reasons I wrote this book. I worked in quite a few organizations that had terrible culture for a variety of reasons. And you're right, it makes you feel drained. It, you know, my family suffered. There's no doubt about it. I would come home, I would have spent my last drop of energy, my last nerve at work. And, I wasn't a lot of fun to be around. And, those are years with my kids and my wife I can't get back. So I thought that if I wrote this book and continued on my mission, that I could help others avoid that. Because, I wasn't, always successful. And the other thing about writing this book and why it is such a practical book, and you mentioned it's short. One of the things that it would have been twice as long if I hadn't been intentional about it, but I wanted a book that an executive could read on one domestic plane flight, because I know how busy everyone is and how crunched for time everyone is. And the other thing, and you already alluded to the questions that are, at the end of every chapter and the thought and then the actions to take, is I didn't want this book to be like so many books I've read that I'd get to the end, I say, there's a lot of great ideas in that book, and then I put it up on the bookshelf. I wanted for people to be able to very deliberately to be able to, once they've completed a chapter, say, okay, these are things I need to think about with regards to this topic.
Yeah, it's almost like a workbook.
Yeah.
Like when I read it, obviously I don't have 100 employees, but some of the ideas are useful even for small businesses who have a small staff. I'd never thought about it. Like, oh my gosh, maybe as I improve my offerings and how I serve my clients and the people that I hire, the vendors and stuff, I never bothered to think about that. And so it's useful. Even I know you wrote it for CEOs of large companies, but I think there's some value in this for even small companies or solopreneurs. I think it's just good things to think about.
Yeah, in fact, I've had several reviews of my book that have said, hey, this isn't just for CEOs. This is useful for leaders at all levels. And I would agree with that. Um, I may have listened to my editor a little too much of saying, hey, you need to niche down your audience as much as you can. It's hard to say everybody or every leader. But I no, I certainly agree with you. This applies to um, anyone in an organization. And one of the reasons, though, I did key in a little bit in the book, specifically around the CEO, or as I call it in my framework, the leader,
The leader, right. And
is
the only
that
one that has a the in front of it. Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
the only element that has an article in front of it, and that's important because only the leader, the person in charge of that organization, can not only influence and empower the culture, but also can control the resources. I've talked to many folks, and you've probably seen this, and other people have seen this in companies where there's positions such as uh, chief chief culture officer, or chief human resource and culture officer. And then when I talk to those folks, you know, they're working hard, but what they do in that element, in that aspect, is they're an assistant to the CEO, because the CEO's culture is not a line of business. It's not operations, it's not
Right.
finance, it's not
You
right,
know.
it's not human resources, right? It
Yeah.
encompasses everything. So only since it does encompass everything, that's why it's really the leader who has to drive the culture. Now, they don't do that by themselves. They can, you know, depending upon the type of culture they want to build, they certainly can involve everyone in the organization. And in fact, I mentioned in the chapter where I talk about governance is you want to have people that are on that culture council that come from not only across all the functions of your organization, but also vertically within your organization.
Mhm.
How else do you know the impact of policies, whether it's pay or PTO or whatever, on everyone in that organization if you don't have people that can speak for them?
Yes, I agree. So this has been really great. I don't want to like talk your ear off. We could talk all day, but I would love to hear from you. What's next on the docket for you in terms of your work in talking about culture?
Yeah, so I give keynote speeches, talks about culture, and again, as I'm very specific about, how do you build it? If you were to go to Amazon right now and Google business culture, you'd get over 3,000 returns.
I did. I Googled, I thought, oh my God. And most of these, I don't know how many people actually read them. Maybe they do. And what I liked about your book is that, I mean, I think academic background is really good, but I'm very intrigued by what the military does because it's much more systematized. So I'm pulling people from that side of the house.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, so there's so much literature, great books about why culture is important and why we should care. I mean, I think Ken Blanchard has co-authored like 80 books or something like that. So I mean, and they're great, and there's lots of folks like him, but there's not a lot out there about how do you actually do it, and that's what I found when I was put in charge of the first organization when I first got in the Army. I knew I wanted to create a great culture, but I didn't know sort of how do you do it. And
You
I
figured out all this by a lot of this by yourself, right? It wasn't like you had an SOP or like this is
right.
how to do it. You sort of figured out the inputs and the outputs and how to measure and how to cajole and I mean, it sounds like you were the first person to be thinking about this.
Well, I don't know if I was the first person, but I tell you, I struggled. It took me literally a decade before I kind of got it. And it's like, oh, okay, you need to be systematic about this. You need to approach this like, as I tell CEOs, they'll describe the culture they're trying to build, and then I'll ask them next question. So how do you do it? They're like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you just described a future state you're trying to achieve in your company. So you must have a strategy to get there, a way to implement that strategy, and a way to measure progress, right? No, not so much. Um, very, 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 very few. I can count on one hand number of CEOs, less than one hand, that were able to sit when I asked them that, were able to say, oh, here, let me show you, or let me tell you about it. And that's what I struggled with. So, again, it took me about a decade to kind of get it. And then it took me the next 25 years to continue to refine and evolve it, making every mistake you could make, I'm sure, 2 or 3 times. Yet another reason why I wanted to write the book, to help some people.
And I love people who've screwed up because they have a lot more to share than
Take
someone who had it all.
take at least a little bit fewer lumps than I took along the way. But I had a lot of great people that I worked with that gave me great ideas and were great examples. I had a boss a couple times. He's retired as a 3-star general, Lieutenant General Tom Spohr. He was a phenomenal example. There were a lot of behaviors, even as a colonel, fairly senior colonel, and as a 1-star general, that I modeled after seeing how he handled situations and looked at things. So, it's not like there aren't people out there that were doing it. It's just that I didn't see some guides and some
Like a systemized, like
systemized way of doing it. Now,
yeah,
you have to have a systemized way of doing it, but I certainly don't want anybody to think that this is not still first, foremost, and always about the people. Because
right.
that's
Some people saying, I don't want a system. I'm unique. And I get that. And people don't like to be boxed in. And that's not what we're talking about at all.
no. And in fact, when you read the book, one thing that I spoke at a college, and the PhD professor there was like, he wanted me to talk about the book. And one thing he pointed out, he goes, is that, what he says, this is culture agnostic. No matter what kind of culture you think is best for your company and your people, because let's face it, there are successful organizations that have great cultures that don't look like the other organizations. I will guarantee you that the culture of an organization that runs a nuclear power plant is significantly different from an ad agency.
Right.
I take great comfort in that, actually.
But admin running nuclear power plant.
Right, yeah. Well, different people want different things. Some people are, very quantitative, they're engineers, and they want it. What's most important to them is to be working on the cutting edge of some technology, where some people, that's not as nearly as important for them.
Wow, a lot of wealth of information. I'm going to have you come back as a guest for part 2. This has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Everybody, get the book, Conquer Your Culture, available wherever you get your books, on Amazon. And I'll post a link in the show notes. Thank you so much, David. Anything else you want to share with the audience?
Our website for EDA is edainc.io.
Fabulous. So look him up, everybody. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
Great. Okay.